good morning, good afternoon, good evening, however or wherever you are accessing this podcast. This podcast is about data and monitoring people, and that sounds far from exciting, but it was triggered off by some reporting in the news around Barclays and how they'd scrapped what was in the paper as an inverted commas Big Brother tracking system. It triggered a conversation between myself and Kevin around where is the line between monitoring people / the resource for the benefit of managing performance and the experience that people may have of being inverted commas monitored and controlled. So let us very much down the track of the difference between the intent of a thing and the impact of a thing. So today I am joined by one of the team, the great and powerful Kevin Green, and on with the podcast. Welcome to Leadership Bites with your host Guy Bloom, a leadership podcast, conversations, just me talking and occasional interviews. Check us out at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and tell everyone. So, you might be coughing, which will be absolutely fine. I'll be maybe slurping on some tea, so you can tell me off for that. So, we've got the question.
When does the creation and gathering of data of intelligence become abuse of your workforce?
Yeah. So this came about when we read the Barclays scraps Big Brother software after it was slammed by staff for monitoring their productivity, including trips to the toilet and telling them to avoid breaks. And the headline goes on to say, a Barclays whistleblower, which is always a fantastic terminology, whistleblower, a Barclays whistleblower said the stress this is causing is beyond belief. Employees are worried to step away from their desks and take full lunch breaks. Software tracks employees' trips to the toilets, and the bank said, look, it was a limited pilot. So I guess that just triggered us on what's the difference between data, which you have because you need it to calibrate and to understand and to have insight, yes, versus it becoming monitoring. What's that line, I guess? So I think that's where we were picking it up.
Yes. Agree.
My point then is I'm really fascinated by this one thing, which is I've always asked a question or challenged myself or maybe a room with the idea of if your company could replace you with a robot or AI, so the software to do it or a robot that could do it, and they could do it cheaper than it costs them to have you, do you think they would? And the reason that I asked that question is because I'm pretty sure that most companies would, other than for some particular areas. I guess I'm interested in that kind of connection between monitoring people with data because we really do see them as a resource, as opposed to calibrating to get the best out of the human being. And that's that bit where I'm fascinated by, do we see you really as just a resource? Are you just something to drive in terms of data? Because actually, if we could replace you for half the price with AI or a robot, we would, mate.
Yes.
That's where I think this all kind of connects together.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think.
So we acknowledge that you are a human resource, but our gathering of data means that we increasingly treat you like a beast of burden instead of worrying about your morale and your engagement and what I might do to you because I track your every movement. So for me, it boils down to the advantages and benefits of gathering data and intelligence have been outweighed by the lazy management of it. So I now manage you by your toilet breaks and by your call time rather than engaging with you as a human.
The company says it's about transparency, but the reality is for other people, they see it as, no, you're not actually trying to understand us. There's a trust thing there, isn't there? We don't trust that you're doing this for any other reason than if you could, you wouldn't let us go to the loo. You know, in fact, going to the loo gets in the way.
For example, all of my stats, because of your gathering of intelligence around my activity, could say that I'm doing really flipping well at work for you. I'm nailing all of my targets. Yeah. But because you want to squeeze every last ounce of productivity from me, you might even press me even more to say, here, do you know what, Kev? You could squeeze another 20 seconds off of your unaccounted toilet breaks, couldn't you? Really be in the upper echelon of performance.
And I guess that's what is interesting, isn't it? Because let's say you've calibrated your workforce to the point where they are pretty well doing as well as they can do. They are operating at an optimum pace. That's the resource you've got, and it's in that green zone of output. If you're then the manager of that team, does the business allow you to then hold in that position and say, basically, this is as good as it gets because it is good?
Yes.
And there is no more to be got from my people other than basically basically maintenance of very good.
Yes, and if I pushed even harder because you've shown me a part of a dashboard where I could, then I lose that person's morale and engagement, and they start doing work to rule efforts instead of any investment of discretionary effort.
Yeah, because I can get a little bit more out of them, and I could do it for 6 months or 8 months or a year or whatever it is. I could increase the tempo, but it's almost that the data at some point maybe says, actually, what this data is saying is the only thing we can do to have more output is to squeeze people harder in a manner that then becomes its own detriment, other than the stats will improve in the short term. And actually, if I'm willing to push that, I can validate myself by understanding the data. Look what I've done. Aren't I doing well? But the truth of the matter is, culturally, what I'm actually doing is damaging people, as you said, by treating them as a beast of burden and saying, I don't really care if this breaks because I will have validated myself in the process.
And the risk is you fail to retain your talent, because right now we're not necessarily in the middle of hard economic times, so there is plenty of work available for talented people, so I end up experiencing churn in my work environment, whereas if I'd have managed the data and intelligence well, I would retain my best people instead of pointing them towards the door. Another point that Barclays made was that it was always intended to be a pilot, and they also launched it with an intent to manage overworkers as well, i.e. people staying all hours of the workday. But of course, none of that has come to the surface. We only know about this because people have started to feel a bit too squeezed, because you're now talking to me about toilet breaks, and that's what breaks it for them.
So it's interesting, isn't it? If you think about if this was done with good intent, and we both know a client that you're particularly involved in, which is where they gave people pay rises. There was a pay review, and that message was lost in the manner of its delivery. It became, some of it wasn't explained correctly, some of it wasn't delivered right, and they had this massive opportunity to do something positive, but because of the lens of distrust that already existed, that positive went through that negative frame.
Yes, because it just became treated as a piece of data. So there's a parallel there. They're treating people with data. I make my decision about you because of the data around you.
What I'm also hearing is that if there was this opportunity for positivity in its approach, actually what we want to do with this is we want to ensure that people aren't doing more than they should be, and we don't want an 80-20 rule where 80% of the work's being done by 20% of the people. We want to understand where good performance is and where it isn't, and let's actually lead, very interestingly, with building trust in this process by only focusing on almost the symbols of the positivity of this process, but either through the delivery mechanism of it, the language of the people on the floor who are probably habitualized to using data as a inverted commas, performance management tool, but not with the positivity that you might want to bring to that. It reinforced for those that are at the end of that, which is the people on the phones doing the work at the desk, it reinforced to them, oh, this is just another mechanism to control. So, because the tool itself is neutral, isn't it? It's like a pen. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. You can write nasty things with it or nice things with it. It's the intent of it.
And if you wanted me to argue for Barclays, I would say the intent of the tool is not neutral. I'd say it's good, i.e. there's probably no such thing as too much data, too much intelligence. It's now about how I interpret and understand the intelligence and make it meaningful for the sake of positive management, positive leadership, but instead it ends up becoming weaponized. I experience it as a weapon because you've now talked to me about toilet breaks.
Yeah, so I wonder, it would be fascinating to know how the verbal kind of elegance of that middle tier, or even the most senior tier, in terms of how we offer this to people, what's the language that we need to use to engage them through an element of trusting our intent and trusting the data, and what are the symbolic gestures, demonstrations of its positivity that we can use to build up trust before we start to do anything else with it, that even though it wouldn't be negative, and it would be about maybe shifting people's performance, if they trust our intent and they trust the nature of what we're doing, then it'll be a much more palatable thing because we built that up first. And I imagine none of that went on, or somebody senior had that intent, but the skill wasn't there in the people to transfer it and give it value, I guess.
I agree. I think there's probably two steps that might have been there, but they were probably missing. Number one, an announcement plan, a comms package that says, we are going to trial something. It's about this and it's about that. The benefits to you will be, the benefits to Barclays will be, and this is our why. This is the reasoning behind and the rationale behind this trial. And then the second thing is get the gathering of the middle tier and maybe the frontline management teams to say, this is how we'd like you to lead it. This is how we'd like you to use the intelligence and the data provided, because it has too much of an opportunity to cheese people off. So be careful how you use the intelligence.
When I hear that, what I see when I'm in with a lot of senior teams, I constantly see this disconnect in the pace and the expectation of a technology or a process, i.e. let's bring this product in, this technology in, let's bring it into play, it will make a difference. And yet the vocabulary around it is not considered. The building up the trust in it isn't considered. I once did some work with an organisation that had spent a huge amount of money with an external training organisation, and they'd spent 12 months almost developing a coaching culture. I got a call saying we spent this money and we've just had an employee survey, and the feedback is that our coaching culture is worse than when we started, and we literally can't wrap our heads around it because we've spent a flipping fortune on it.
Yes.
So could you come in, do a diagnostic and have a look? So I was supposed to be in there for a couple of days, and within about 2 hours I knew exactly what had happened. It was fascinating. When I spoke to some groups and said, talk to me about what it's like not being coached here, they said, well, you go into your manager's office, you offer a problem or an issue, and then you have to supply your own answers, and then, what's the point of going in there? And you kind of go, when you say you have to supply your own answers, they ask questions, but they don't really supply the answer, but their expectation is that you have to come up with it. And you mean like coaching? and it was hilarious. But
I wondered where you're going to go with that, because I thought we were going to have a conversation about what's coaching.
Yeah, exactly. And what I realised was that they were good at coaching, but they weren't highlighting that was what was happening. So in the mind of the person who was used to being dealt with in a very autocratic, micromanaged way, even though the manager had moved forwards in their competence and capability and intent, the lens was one of distrust for the experience. Therefore, it's not, I've been coached and come to an answer. It's, you've asked me questions and I've had to find my own answer. Well, why did I bother coming in? And once we got the senior team just to very quickly identify, hey, why don't we move into a coaching conversation, or we have a conversation and say, in terms of just the coaching that we've done there, how has that helped? The moment they identified the experience as being of value and not one of being autocratic, but one of enabling them, boom, the whole thing changed. And I think that's indicative of something like this.
Yes.
The process is neutral, but we haven't invested in the mechanism of allowing people to get over the hurdle of their distrust of us, or what's happened in the past, or what you're likely to do with it. We say the difference between management is informing people, but what leaders do is make sense of things for people. And I think that's what I'm hearing here. They never made sense of it for people.
Yes, there's a bridge in the middle that was probably missing in your coaching example. Historically, I'm used to coming to you for my answers, and you have trained me, therefore, to be utterly dependent on you for my ways forward out of my problems. But now we bring in a third-party provider, skill you up in terms of your coaching skills. Now you seek to tap into my potential, and I'm not used to that, so it's of no use to it, or I don't experience it as a positive experience because you used to help me, and now you tell me to come along with my own solutions, and nothing in between.
In larger organisations, I think what I see is there is a them and an us, and the organisations that have been around a lot longer and aren't startups and aren't that fleet of foot smaller organisation, they do have people that have been in place a long time who may very well be in some sort of position of they have been damaged in the past by the behaviours of managers, potentially the ones that they've got in place right now, all the way through to 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So they are in a position of not trusting. And there's something here, I'm just reading actually just one of the comments where Trade Union Congress described Barclays' use of the software as, and wait for this, dystopian Big Brother tactics that show a total disregard for hard-working staff. And I'm like, well, yeah and no. Is that the union are taking a position of automatically seeing them through that lens because that's our job to do so? Or did Barclays sit down with a dystopian Big Brother tactic strategy and go, right?
And go squeeze our people, please.
Yeah, and this is what they're dealing with. And I just wonder, at what point would somebody have gone, do we understand not just our culture, but do we understand the human dynamic of people's relationship with change, the level of trust that does or doesn't exist with us as an organisation, and how we could use something like this as a stepping stone to trust by showing its value rather than allowing it to be taken from us because we haven't controlled the narrative?
Maybe in the sphere of trying to control the narrative, maybe you even build up a bank of positive experiences through use of the data. For example, do you know what, Fred? I really appreciate the way you ended that interaction with your last customer. They left that conversation interaction with you thoroughly impressed with Barclays, and that's down to you. And if we build up a bank of those deposits, the mindset is, I can see how they can make a positive use of this new technology. But if I pile straight in with, you need to slice 20 seconds off your average call length, you need to make sure you desk more, you need to turn off web chat because your calls are suffering, then all of a sudden my only and my whole experience is that you've weaponized this technology.
Yeah, you've taken the humanity out of my role.
Yes.
I'd be interested, because I had to know also whether or not they would look at the competence of an individual and say, you don't need to be any quicker. You don't need to rush back from lunch, Fred. Be on time, but don't worry, because the quality of your work is so significantly valuable that we're not measuring you. It's good to know. Actually, what you are is more an indicator of somebody that is good at their job, doesn't need to be managed in this way, and actually it might help us relax some of this approach by recognising that good doesn't need to be controlled through that mechanic.
Yes.
Because goodies good at their job and they'll turn up on time and they'll work at a certain pace and they solve customer issues very well. It's almost as if you think your people aren't that good, then you kind of need to get as much work out of them as you can.
Yes.
If you've gotten to a point where you think they're very good at their job, the chances are you don't need to push them any harder because you don't want to mess with that.
And now, I thought it anyway, but now this new data and intelligence validates that you're really good at your job.
Yeah.
I can set you free, you're a self-starter, you're individually motivated, and the data says that as well. So well done you. Keep going with that.
It leads us into the relationship that people have with seeing just people as a resource, and that line between what is the reality of most organisations that we come into contact with, which is a lot of national organisations over the years, and how they see their people in terms of being a resource that is required to output task, which is, kind of what I'm paying you for.
Fair, yeah.
Yeah, but also we understand, call it social responsibility, just call it common decency, or just whatever you might be, but we understand that there's a point where we can't ask you to work past there because it becomes untenable. Yeah. Or do we pay you so much money that we don't care?
Yeah.
Or are you so low paid that you don't go somewhere else so we don't care? I'm interested in that, I guess.
Or is it that I have now got such a suite of data at my fingertips, I don't need to get to know you, I don't need to motivate you, I don't need to get close enough to understand your motivators, I will just manage you by the data. And that's easy, and people will revert to easy before doing the hard stuff and the really valuable stuff.
I think there's a lot of that, isn't there, where at a certain level I might not feel that I can take up the chain the humanity of the situation, but what I can do is be seen to be, inverted commas, on it by my relationship and my understanding of the data.
And also, I don't have to invest in the humanity experience of my people or my frontline managers if I can invest in data, because the data will do the work for us now. All you need to do is communicate the results of the data and tell people that they need to work harder.
Yeah.
That's cheaper, it's easier, and it's faster.
And you could argue that what might happen is they could get to a point, and they do have this software that knows when you have gone to the toilet. Yes, we know that. It knows either via eye contact or face recognition or whatever it is that it's doing. It knows where you physically are, it knows how long you've been on those calls, so it might very well get to the point where what is the need for the manager? The AI itself is managing you.
Yes.
And rather like a factory,
yes.
Now there's the machines and the people, now there's just the people that look after the machines. So
receiving positive reinforcement from your line manager represents excellent human fuel for most of us at work.
Yeah.
So if we fast forward 5 50 years, what will happen when we get our on-screen message from the Alexa equivalent that says, well done, Fred, you knocked it out of the park today? Will I experience that as human fuel? Will it motivate me? Or is it just a machine telling me I'm doing all right?
So that's interesting, isn't it? Because people play video games and they get positive reinforcement from something that's not human.
Yes.
So I know where you're going with that, and that's a really good point, because you could argue I wouldn't trust it because I would know that it's not human. The other element of it is, no, there's a line of what good is, and I've gone over it. And this is the equivalent of I've unlocked that next level on the video game, right?
Yes.
And if something comes onto the screen and it's an avatar going, hey, well done you've beaten the average, or boom, my recognition for that, I can't thank you enough. And you go, I've unlocked the next level of praise. And maybe the next level of praise is a different character, or it's a different style. If you get music with the praise when you get to level 3, rather than just, who knows, right?
Yes.
It's almost irrelevant. But people's relationship, especially youth that's coming through,
right?
You know, we're of an age, right? I'm 50. I don't trust it because I saw the Terminator films, you know, and I'm pretty sure that we're 3 steps away from Armageddon at any point. You know, my 8-year-old, you know, his relationship with it is completely different and much more trusting and, you know, simpatico, for the want of a better word.
Because it's normal.
Yeah, because it's normal, right?
It could well be this generation or the next generation that would experience a bot on my screen telling me that I've delivered really high level performance today. I might experience that as motivational.
Yeah, that's interesting, where we go, all right then, you know, you used to go into town and there used to be, the retail trade was thriving. Now, not so much, because guess what? You go online and decimated a lot of those normal kind of experiences. So, you know, home working and all that, why have people in a call centre? Once we get into that virtual space of I can train you virtually, I can praise you virtually, I can manage you virtually. Once we get into that space, why have these environments? It's not so much is it the thin end of the wedge, that would be a really negative connotation, but there is, I believe, a push and an aim to move people to that place that says you are going to ultimately, once we can find the right mechanic for bringing you into the business and explaining this is how we work, which is interesting, because actually if you were new and you were going for a job interview and they said, by the way, we have this rather fascinating software, what it does is it observes and it gives us the data and we can really help make you great at your job because of it, you go, oh, that sounds brilliant. And actually, if they start to bring it in at the right way, over time you won't bat an eyelid at it. And if it is handled well and it is about performance, then the reality of it is that you will become probably very familiar with it. Maybe it's a little bit like the Google Lens thing. It was a great idea, but nobody liked it yet.
Or maybe the technology becomes so advanced and so excellent, jobs are very rarely needed for a level of skill.
Yeah.
So actually, in the name of profit, I don't need to worry one jot about how motivated you are. You will be so grateful for this employment that I can afford to really hack you off by using this data and using this intelligence. That's a danger.
So what I'm hearing there is that there's this great opportunity to use it in a manner that actually you might say is incredibly engaging, adds value, and really shows people where they can be at their best. And the other side of it is actually what I can do is I can drive you in a manner that says I'm not per se interested in you, I'm only interested in your output.
Yes.
It's probably whatever you've got right now is what you'd have if that brought in. If your organisation cares and is engaged with you as a human being, they would do it with elegance. And if they don't, they'll use it like a baseball bat.
Yes. And of course, every firm will purport that they care about the well-being and engagement and morale, and they'll have engagement surveys. But it depends on what the economy's doing at the time as well. So right now it could feel like it's an employees market because there's quite a bit of work around for talented people. But if the economy shifts, then all of a sudden it could be an employers market, and I don't need to worry so much about care and motivation and the human element because I just want to make money. I've got the upper hand as the employer.
So when we started this with the question about where does it become data that's there to add value and where does it become monitoring in the context of has more of a negative control connotation just to get the most out of it. Our end space there is humanity and culture is led by a senior person or a senior team. The software or the product or whatever it is being utilised is almost irrelevant because I can beat you with the stick that's literal with me in front of you, or I can beat you with the data from the software. But one way or the other, if I'm a beat you with a stick kind of person, I'm going to use the tool of my choice.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with what the software's doing. It's the manner of my application of it.
And if you were the person at the top, if you were the person being pitched to by these software suppliers, if the pitch goes really well, I at Barclays, I'm responsible for the purchase of it, and I experience this as a very positive pitch and presentation, and I decide to go ahead and buy your software. If I'm at the top of that food chain, I may very well assume that my people know how to implement it and use it as a positive tool. But then of course it falls down after that, because there is no care around how we build the narrative, how we launch it, how we engage people with it, and then I've lost control.
Yes, that would be very interesting to understand what the conversation was after this hit the papers at a senior level. Did they go, oh, that's typical of the press? Or did they go, oh, that's typical of the unions? Or did they go, well, that's typical of our middle management that they couldn't even make that land?
Yes.
Or did they go, so basically we are a senior team who has not created competence in something as relatively simple as delivering a message about the value that we want to bring that would be trusted. We are responsible for that, and that's something that we need to shift in a manner that would mean actually we could reintroduce this in a manner that it would be accepted, because we have the skill and the craft to be able to do so in our leadership team. So I'd love to know, have they gone, let's just bin it now, we're never going to get traction with it? Or have they gone, no, let's continue with it and who cares what they think? Or have they gone, yeah, let's pause, let's make this work in one area, let's get the right people delivering the message, and let's really challenge our people to understand how to bring things to people in a manner where it's interpreted with a positive, which means when the press do pick up on it or we are attacked, there's enough positivity around it to say, well, actually, that may be your interpretation, but this is the experience our people are having. So no, we reject your negativity and we reject your attack to get clickbait in the press because we're a national institution, and we reject that. I'd love to have been privy to the debrief and where they've gone to with it.
I would love to be privy, or I would love to think that there was a moment in time when the senior folk decided to go ahead with this trial. I'm going to purchase your software, and then I engage my senior team around the announcement. I extol the virtues and the benefits of it as it was in the original pitch. But just as my senior team are just about to leave the boardroom, I go, just a moment, folks, do us a favour, tell me, how are you going to launch this? And then I'll know. I would know what their thinking is around this. And are you going to engage with it? Are you going to form a compelling narrative around it? Or are you just going to say, go do to your middle people?
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, that ability of the senior team to not take things at face value because their people are, inverted commas, professional, which they no doubt are, but do they have, and I don't really use the word emotional sensitivity, that's not really, I mean, technically that's what it might be, but the emotional intelligence, but also I would just say the craft, I use that word a lot, but that craft and that competence of going, look boss, planning out the delivery of it's not the issue, putting the software on the system isn't the issue, physically training people isn't the issue.
Brilliant.
It's all irrelevant. All you're really interested in is how will we get people to engage with it? Because actually, even if it's not the best process or it's not the best software, engaged people will make it work. And if it's absolutely phenomenal and they're disengaged from it, we won't even get it off the ground. So it's not really about buying the perfect piece of software.
Yes.
I get that in performance management when people say, yeah, we're investing X amount of pounds in this fantastic performance management online software. Now, I've got no problem with that. But here's the thing. If your people aren't engaged with the concept of performance management, they're going to reject this. The fact that it looks nice is irrelevant. It's almost, if you think that that's going to make them engage with it, it won't. Get them engaged with it and then invest in it.
So here's the question you'd like the senior person to engage the boardroom with. Now that we're going ahead with this, come back to me with your plan as to how will you optimise, through use of this software, performance at Barclays whilst taking our people with us.
While taking our people with us. Yeah, and what will I see that will tell me that that's real outside of you telling me?
Yes.
So it's not about me trusting you. Your narrative will be managing me. How would I independently know? I.e., if I just walked through the floor and spoke to people about it, what will I hear and in what timeline? What are the things that are going to tell me that this is being not just understood, not just accepted, but engaged with? Maybe not loved, but engaged with. And the thinking that goes with that kind of stuff.
What will you do with your people to cause people to be a fan of this launch rather than a doubter of this launch?
And I would probably hazard that 90% of the effort goes into the, inverted commas, project management of it. As opposed to, actually, do you know what? We're all quite senior people. We put this into a process plan.
This task.
we deliver this task. That's not really the complexity of the job. I mean, it's got its own anxiety around getting it done. The actually 80-90% of our effort needs to go into all the stuff that we've been speaking about. So our conclusion is, guess what? It's not the product, it's not the service, it's the intent. Not even that, I guess it's the end game. What do you want people saying? What do you want them thinking? What do you want them to feel about it? And is the amount of effort you're putting into it equal to the expectation that you have of it at the end? Because if 100% of your expectation is I want the process in and I don't care whether or not people like it, well, then you can put 100% of your energy into just getting it done. But actually, if you think about it, if 90% of what I want is people to engage with it so we can really make it valuable, and 10% of my expectation is that you can deliver the darn thing effectively, then where is our energy going in relation to our output expectation? And I very much doubt it was measured that way.
So the creation of the data, the creation of the intelligence, I'm a fan of. The more intelligent I can be, the more I can understand the performance and the productivity of this place. But it's now how I treat and what I do with that intelligence that will make all the difference.
Well, let's wrap up our first podcast together.
Yes.
I know. All right. So let me just press the stop and I'm going to go and have another cup of tea. That's it. Subscribe so you keep updated on new episodes. Visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with us and find out more. This has been Leadership Bites. See you soon.